Legendary by Joshua Wheeler. Read by Joshua Wheeler. Chapter 1. Life didn't prepare the everyday person for the hardships thrust upon them. Not in the world we all knew, and it certainly wasn't any better in the days after the apocalypse. Society broke down, and neighbor fought neighbor. Hope was a rare feeling among these that survived. Family became a burden, and few people stuck together to form any kind of a stable home. However, even the worst of situations can create a shiny little ray of hope. In a small downtrodden town, two young men were relaxing, unaware of the burden soon to be placed upon their shoulders. "So where would you be, if the bombs had never gone off?" asked Samuel. "Man, I don't know. It's been 6 years," replied David. The two men sat across from each other in a worn-down diner. "I guess I'd be married or something, maybe," continued David, his long brown hair being swept back with his hands as he pondered the mysteries of life. David has never considered much about life, or himself for that matter. He was a decent-looking Caucasian with a goatee and no mustache. The ladies seemed to love his green eyes, though. He felt pride in this. Beyond that, he just felt average. "I think I would be a firefighter." "Yeah, or a musician," Samuel chimed in. Always a ladies' man, he was proud Hispanic with short, trimmed facial hair and a brown buzzed haircut. Just two best friends enjoying a meal as the world around them falls apart. The booth they visited on a weekly basis was at the front of their favorite diner, against the glass storefront window. It was tinted enough to block the view, but still let in plenty of light. "A lot has changed, man. Now I just want to make it through the day," spoke David, as he contemplated the decay of his world over the last half-decade. Life has been good back then. He was still in school, and people were yet to be so strange. Then, for seemingly no reason, all around the world, explosions started happening. The news said this country had bombed that country, and on and on. No one knew the truth, though. Who started it? Why? Then things got weirder by the day. Reality started to seem like a bad science fiction novel. Huge chunks of the planet had lost power like they had been hit with an electromagnetic bomb. Churches were proclaiming that the end of days, and others yelled Armageddon. Life as we knew it was over. It was no longer about grinding away at the day job for minimum wages. It became about survival. People were quick to start looting, and police and government broke down faster than neighborhood watch. The world still had technology and a future, it just had some issues to deal with first. Like, who shot who? So, life was hard, and David and Samuel have watched each other's backs through the worst of it. "We gotta get to the dojo, or Master's gonna be mad at us," said David, preparing to return to his favorite place on Earth, the studio he had been training at for years, his one source of anger management. He was a patient, kind person, but he could never understand all the rage he felt. He didn't know its source, but he was grateful for the release valve on his soul that martial arts had given him. Samuel replied, as he was reaching for the check, "Miss, we are... Rit." He didn't even finish his sentence before a shadowy figure slammed on the window, startling both men. "Forgive me," was heard through the glass, followed by a deafening blast. The glass of the window exploded inward, followed by the force of the blast. It carried both men over the table and into what was now nothing but debris. Moments passed as Samuel came to and started lifting himself up. In a swamp a few hundred miles away, a stitched-up, disfigured creature awoke from a deep slumber in a burst of electricity. "David, you all right?" cried Samuel. He stood up and looked around, but heard nothing. As his ears were still ringing, a shuffling near the window caught Samuel's attention. He noticed the body of an old man in what looked like tattered rags. "Sir, are you okay?" Samuel spoke as he approached the seemingly lifeless body. He worried about his friend, but was more worried for the stranger. As he reached down to check on the old man, the body said it lifted up off the ground and righted itself. Now staring the feeble-looking stranger in the face, Samuel was terrified. He had seen some freaky stuff before, but exploding old men who could float was the cherry on the top. The old man looked at him with a gaze that seemed to search for his very soul. Samuel couldn't help but notice the man's one good eye was milky-looking. The other would not even open. "I am sorry, Samuel. Forgive me. I was fighting for so long, and now I haven't the strength anymore. You were the last in our line. I was merely able to delay the inevitable. You must stop him. You must stop Dreyfus." As the old man finished speaking, he placed the palm of his hand over Samuel's eyes. Samuel could barely get a scream out before the brightest light he had ever seen flashed before him. He felt the light in his body, mind, and very soul. He was changing. His complete essence was being replaced. His true self was being born. Samuel suddenly knew the truth, the terrifying truth. He knew everything. "Shit, dude, what happened?" groaned David, as he climbed out of a pile of broken chairs. He stood up and looked around, saddened by the loss of this diner. The pie was good, the whiskey was better. Suddenly realizing he didn't see his best friend anywhere, he ran to the front window. "Samuel!" he yelled. His friend was on his knees outside the building facing the road. David quickly ran around the corner to the front door and out to his buddy. "Hey man, what's going on? Are you hurt?" He spoke as calmly as he didn't feel. Life was a never-ending series of anxiety and bad experiences. Why would his friend be okay? That was the person David kept hidden away. He put on a brave face, but really felt powerless. All the karate chops in the world would not stop life. "David, I am all right, brother. Boy, do I have a tale for you," spoke the way too calm Samuel. David watched as Samuel rose to his feet. He noticed a pile of ash and cloth in front of his friend. What a weird day. Samuel turned around and looked David in the eyes. To his horror, David jumped back as he saw what happened to Samuel's eyes. They had gone from blue to a milky white color. "Dude, what happened? Can you see? What the hell?" exclaimed David. "I'm fine. I'm blind, yeah, but I can see, bro. Turns out I'm a wizard," responded the newly enlightened Samuel. "All right, Mr. Potter, what are you going on about?" asked David, now safely standing inside the martial arts studio they both frequent. "I know I said I'd explain when we got here, but man, you are not going to believe this," stated Samuel, as he started to get noticeably more excited. Sam continued. "First, an icebreaker." Sam clapped his hands and a puff of freezing cold air formed between his palms. After a moment, the air turned to ice. David was confused and also intrigued. He always believed there was more to life than the everyday nonsense. He wanted to believe in magic and in the supernatural, and even when he had never been given any reason to. Staring at the ice, David snapped out of his slack-jawed daydream when Sam yelled, "Let us heat things up!" Samuel breathed in deep and blew from his mouth all over the ice, melting it. The water dripped down to the floor, but Sam had no burn marks on his hands. "What the fuck?" cried David. "How did you do that?" David added as he stared in equal shares of disbelief and exhilaration. "Magic," Sam exclaimed, as he waved his hands in the air and wiggled his fingers. David thought Sam was way too happy about the whole situation, considered they had both been in an explosion less than 15 minutes ago. Okay, I believe you, but do the fire thing again," David pleaded. Sam was way more than happy to breathe fire for his buddy. Cool. Okay, magic check. What the hell happened at the diner? We were sitting there eating, and then boom! I was flying across the room, and you were just outside?" David spoke, demanding some kind of an explanation. Sam looked around the room and took a good look at the dojo. He took in all the nooks and crannies, the gear haphazardly strewn about, and the dingy walls they had put holes in many a time. "I've always loved it here. I felt safe. I felt in control. Life outside these doors has not been good to us for a very long time. I always felt like it was unfair, like the world was out to get us. And now, after this morning, I know why," responded Sam. "This morning, as we ate our breakfast at what I consider the tastiest diner in town, I might add, an old man approached the glass window by our booth. You know that much? He would not see, he could not hear, but he could feel and sense. What he sensed was me. He was after me. That old man was of my blood." "You've heard of Merlin, right?" Sam asked. "You mean to tell me an ancestor of Merlin came after you?" asked David. "No. I mean to tell you that old man was Merlin. The Merlin, and I am a direct descendant of the Merlin bloodline," replied the newly minted wizard. "How in the fuck, dude? So where did he go? And how are you now able to shoot ice out of your butt?" asked David. "Ha! Well, when he reached the glass, he lost control of the last bit of magic he was holding back, and it caused an explosion. That is why you flew backwards. But he caught me in the air and pulled me in close to himself using his fading powers. Now I am totally crapping my pants at this point." He was standing there, covered in rags for clothes, and was wrinkly as if he had taken an hour-long bath. I couldn't move. He started raising his hands to my head, and his fingers began to glow. He never spoke a word, but the moment his hands touched my head, I heard it all. He was speaking directly to my mind. He told me he was my elder grandfather, and he had been protecting the world for several thousand years. Samuel spoke as he retold the story from his own perspective. Samuel paused for a moment to let his friend take in all the details of what he had just said. David got up and started pacing back and forth as he thought about the tale he was being told. "Throw some fire again," asked David. And Sam did. "Okay, I'm on board and following so far. This is some crazy shit, though," David said as he sat down on the empty dojo floor and motioned for Sam to continue. "So it all happened in a moment, but it felt like an hour. Merlin was at the end of his life. As a master of the magics, he should have been able to live forever. But circumstances being what they are, he was put under a lot of magical stress. See, about 1200 years ago, Merlin was battling a mighty sorcerer named Dreyfex. Dreyfex was so mighty that Merlin could not defeat him. He could barely slow him down. Merlin feared the worst, so in a desperate attempt to defeat this evil mage, he cast a spell on the world. This spell sealed up every ounce of magic all across the planet. When the magic was gone, the wizard dropped dead, for his power was tied to a crystal he had implanted in his own forehead. It made him mighty and sustained him, but when the magic left, it was nothing more than a rock shoved deep inside a man's head. Samuel stopped talking and sat a moment as he toiled over the knowledge he now held and what it meant for their future. Okay, so Big Daddy Merlin came to you, touched you on the head, and talked for an hour, while I was laying on the floor covered in dirt and eggs. Gotcha, spoke David as he realized this tale was going to be bad for him. Yep, let me jump ahead. Merlin said he was at the end with the magic and needed a new wizard to take over for his cause. I tried to tell him I was not a wizard, but before I could, he showed me the truth. He showed me my family lineage and how I was capable of so much. He then unlocked the magic in me, and boy did it flood in. I was filled with power, knowledge, and truth. In a flash of pure burning white-hot light, it was all over. And as I was reborn, his body turned to dust before me and was gone. That was when you walked out and found me. It took a moment, but then I realized the magic had taken my physical sight and given me a different way to see. Sam finished talking and sat down with his friend. David was dumbfounded. How was this possible? How was his friend, out of all the people in the world, a flame-throwing, kind of but not really blind wizard? He believed it, but he was trying to wrap his head around it, and what he had just heard. So that's it? He made you magic and vanished? Asked David. Well, he said one last thing as he vanished. He said Dreyfax is coming, replied Samuel. Dreyfax? The dead guy mage with a rock in his head from hundreds of years ago? That Dreyfax? Shouted David. Samuel calmly replied, Yes, that one. See, the story goes on. After Merlin sealed up the world of magic, everything was good for a time. But as the years wore on, so too did the spell. It took a toll on the wizard. He held on the best he could, but the spell was like a raging bull smashing against the bonds of its mystical will. Slowly holes were formed in the spell, and bits of magic leaked back out into the world. This went on for years, until he finally started losing the battle, and massive amounts of magic were released upon an unsuspecting world. When he finally realized and accepted that he was coming to the end of the wizard road, he started seeking out an heir. He went from one to the next, but nearly all of them were incompatible with the magic, until finally he found me. Samuel had barely finished talking when David piped back up. Wait, large amounts of magic, like the explosion at the cafe? David asked. No, that was child's play compared to the shockwaves spread across the world, responded Samuel, knowing what was about to happen. David rose to his feet and grabbed Samuel by his shirt. Are you serious? Your fucking grandpa blew up the damn world? That makes him a terrorist, David furiously yelled as he shook his best friend. Whoa, okay, relax. I agree. The sins of the father and all that, but can we put it all back on track? We can fix this, yelled Samuel as he grabbed David's wrist and magically floated himself up from the ground to a standing position. As he held his hands over David's wrist, he began to glow. He held on tight as his friend started to panic and pull away. It was over in mere moments, and Samuel released David, and his friend shot backwards confused and angry. What the hell did you do to me? Yelled David. I turned on the latent magic within you. You are meant to be a warrior, not just some guy struggling to get by, boasted Sam. He pointed to a katana sitting against a wall inside the room. Pick your favorite weapon, and let me show you a thing or two, Samuel instructed. David, still peeved at his lifelong friend for assumptions and just being related to a guy, walked over to the katana and picked it up. He pulled the blade from the sheath as he turned to Samuel. All right, I am a little curious. What next? Spoke David. Now, feeling confident and calm with the blade in his hand. Focus on the hilt of the sword. Imagine it glowing. Concentrate on what could be and what is. Samuel spoke calm and firm. David looked up at the blade and tried to concentrate, but too much had happened too quickly. He could only think about his life, and how hard it had been. How he wished he could make life better for everyone. He felt powerless in the depths of his own bitterness. I can't. I don't know what you expected, but it's just too much. We have struggled too hard. Every day people are dying because the world has little to no order. Was there ever a chance for us? David dropped his sword and walked out of the dojo. He needed to be alone. Forget this day ever happened. Samuel stood there in the studio all alone, contemplating his next actions. Should he start the harrowing quest he felt in his heart was his destiny, or help his friend come to terms with the truth the world was not ready to hear yet? He did not know. He had been gifted knowledge, but very little direction. I see you two are at it again. What is David so worked up? Spoke a voice from the entrance of the training room. As Samuel raised his head to see who it was, a smile spread across his face. Hello, Master. We were discussing some very heavy issues. I have a lot on my plate, and David is so lost in the world, Samuel replied. The dojo master approached Samuel. He was a tall man in his 40s. He was a full head taller than his students. The master noticed the change in Samuel's eyes and began to slowly place around his pupil. Young one, this life has many paths. I can see that you have finally found yours. David has been lost soul for a very long time, but he is loyal, and I have seen into his heart. Treat him as you always have, and he will find his inner strength, the dojo master instructed. After a moment of silence, the master turned away from Samuel and began walking towards the back of the dojo. Samuel nodded his understanding and was ready to head home for the night. One last thing. This trial you are about to undertake will require the aid of others. In the darkness lies a friend. Be careful. I believe in you, boys, spoke the master as he vanished into a back room. Samuel had plenty to consider. He would sleep on it. He followed David's path and left the building. They both lived in a duplex across the street from the dojo and shared everything they could to ease the strain of modern day. He was on the left, and David resided on the right. The future would wait until tomorrow. As David slept in his bed, he dreamed of magic and wonder, burning buildings and dark wizards. He dreamed of combat, which was not uncommon, as he had always been a fighter at heart, even though his fears and uncertainties. Then his dream changed to a smoky room filled with shadowy figures circling around the form of a panicked woman. She was beautiful. He noticed this first, of course. He was only human, after all. The woman had wild, wavy, shoulder-length blonde hair and had tattoos resembling tiger stripes on her arms. She was dressed in a simple white nightgown. He noticed all of these details in an instant, but he was more concerned with the shadows taking shape around her. They looked like ninjas from these old black and white movies he loved as a child. Only this shadowy bunch had no face, just glowing purple eyes piercing through a mask. He tried to reach out and help her, but nothing happened. He looked down and realized he wasn't really there. David struggled against futility as the woman tried to fight back. She was knocked down to the floor from behind, and as one of the shadowy ninjas raised his sword to strike, down came the blade. "No!" yelled David as he woke up. He looked around the room, taking in his surroundings. He was home, but his dream had felt so real. It felt like he had been there, or it had been a real event. David still felt the cold air of the room and the taste of burning incense. He did not know the woman, but he had hoped she was all right, wherever she may be, and if she was real. Groggy and upset, he climbed up out of his bed and got dressed in his favorite shirt and blue jeans. It was just so hard to believe what had happened yesterday. I woke up thinking the world was broken, but I knew my place in it. I went to sleep angry at a world broken by forces I didn't understand. Who could I talk to? Who would believe me? Just my crackpot friend who can suddenly shoot fire and ice? If it's all true, then what is he really capable of? He's the descendant of a great wizard. Then he must be able to do more. Fuck, I have to help. This is all scary as shit, but I cannot leave my best friend hanging. Decisions. David finished getting dressed and exited through the front door. He stood on his porch in the morning sun and thought about all the trouble in his town, the power outages, cars, electronics that did not work, and the overall lack of food and water. He walked next door and started banging on Samuel's wall. "Hey, Samuel boy, you home? I want to ask you a few questions," barked David, in a low growl of a voice. He waited a few moments, then heard movement from inside the home. "I'm awake, bro. Just come on in," replied Samuel. David did not hesitate. He opened the door and walked right in. He had done so hundreds of times before, but this time he was shocked at what he saw. His friend sat in the middle of the living room with all the furniture pushed around against the walls and stacks of books to his side. "What the... Do I even need to ask?" David spoke in a confused state. Samuel looked up from his library of books. "I know you are upset, David. I need your help. I have just had this huge destiny, burden, quest. I don't know, whatever you want to call it, but it was put in my lap. I didn't ask for it. I don't want it. But I do know I'm the only one that can do it. Dreyfix has to be stopped, and one wizard cannot get the job done, but maybe a wizard and his best friend can." Samuel finished talking and looked down at his books. "I know it is a lot to ask, but I believe we are meant to do this," he added. David looked down at his friend, thought for a moment, and replied, "Yeah, brother, I will help you. I love this place. It's been mine for years, but I will be damned if I'm going to stand by and let our world get worse while I have a chance to do something." Samuel grinned like a big idiot at David's response. He knew he had a long journey ahead, but at least he wasn't going to be alone. "Samuel, I do have to know, can you do more magic? Can you leave this town in better shape than Merlin did? I understand he did not mean to cause all this damage and hurt people, but if you can do anything to undo some of that, I beg you to try." David spoke from his heart. He could leave this town and not look back, but he would be much happier about that decision if life here were better before he did. Samuel stood up, looked David in the eyes as best he blind man could, and replied, "Of course, man. I've been studying books on electricity and farming, all kinds of stuff. I don't know the full extent of my powers, but I think I can help." Samuel and David walked outside to the street and stopped. Samuel raised his hands up and started focusing. Samuel quickly felt magic rising up from deep inside himself. He felt the coils of power deep down in the earth and running through the power lines around him. He could feel the breaks in the flow, like a phantom itch on a limb he did not have. With a little more effort, he reached out to these spots and wheeled them back to working shape. Broken wires reconnected and damaged equipment was repaired. The hum of electricity could be felt all around as Samuel saw the surge in power with these repairs. To him, the light was almost blinding. He had done something he didn't quite understand, but many lives in their small town were about to get much better. Is that it? Did it work? I see the light in the house got a little bit brighter. I seemed to pulse for a moment. I know something happened, but don't electrocute anyone, asked David. He was anxious to know, but scared at the same time. Hard knocks from life will do that to you. Yeah, it worked. There is more power in the town than there has been in years. It feels amazing. I feel great. How did I do that? Replied Sam. His face had a look of disbelief as he stared out at a world only he could see. David noticed his slack-jawed face and said, "Thank you. These people are going to have a high quality of life just off the better power." So, where did we start? How did we find Derrifex? Further down the street in town, a woman Zilla knew had a farm. On the opposite end of town, a husband and wife had a sudden, brilliant idea on making new clothing for the townspeople with no desire for personal gain. Samuel knew all of this and smiled.